Snow lashes against Boise like shards of glass. In a deserted parking lot, an old Marine named Jonas Hartwell freezes mid-step because inside a frost-covered van, 3 German Shepherd puppies lie stacked like forgotten toys. No breath, no sound, only the quiet edge between life and loss. One black pup shields the other 2 with the last warmth he has left. A pale gray muzzle hangs still, and on the windshield, a thin crack glitters like a countdown. Jonas never planned to be a hero again. But when his hand touches the icy glass, the past he spent years outrunning hits him harder than the storm. One swing of a pry bar will turn this van from tomb to battlefield, from silence to a fight that
Hang
will
in there,
change
buddy.
more than
You're
their
gonna be
lives.
okay.
It will change his. And what happens next will make you believe in winter miracles, in broken men finding purpose again, and in the fierce loyalty of the smallest creatures. Before we begin, tell me where you're watching from. Drop your country in the comments below. And if you believe no soul, human or animal, should ever freeze alone in the dark, hit subscribe and share this story with someone who needs hope. Boise, Idaho slipped into winter, the way a person slips into exhaustion. Quiet at first, then all at once. By late evening, the sky had turned an iron gray color that warned anyone paying attention that snow was coming fast. The air carried a crisp, metallic cold that clung to skin, stung fingertips, and made the breath from every passerby appear and vanish like faint ghosts drifting down the sidewalk. Street lamps flickered in the rising wind as if bracing themselves, their halos shrinking against the thickening storm. Farther out from downtown, where the roads curled toward the foothills and the houses thinned out, the wind pushed harder. It rattled porch railings and scraped loose branches along driveways, announcing the approaching blizzard long before the first heavy flakes fell. Mountain View Market stood at the edge of this growing cold, a small, practical grocery store with its windows fogged from the heaters running non-stop inside. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting a steady glow on the polished tile floors and rows of shelves stacked neatly with boxed meals, canned soups, and plastic-wrapped produce. It wasn't a warm place in a cozy sense, but compared to the wind clawing at the glass outside, it was a pocket of refuge. Inside, Jonas Hartwell pushed a shopping cart down the frozen food aisle. The wheels let out a rhythmic squeak, one that matched the slight limp he carried in his right leg. Jonas was 52, tall, and built with the kind of strength that didn't come from gyms, but from years of lifting equipment, repairing machinery, and stubbornly refusing to let time slow him down. His shoulders were wide, though slightly hunched, a posture formed less from age and more from years of habit, as if he was always preparing for impact. His short, steel-gray hair was trimmed in an old military style he never cared to change, and the deep lines along his face suggested long stretches of work, weather, and silence more than anything else. Jonas moved with purpose. He wasn't the type to linger. He grabbed instant coffee, a couple of heat-and-eat dinners, and a box of matches. No browsing, no hesitation. His thoughts were already outside, calculating how quickly the storm would worsen. At the checkout counter stood Sarah Quinn, a young cashier no older than 22. Sarah had a welcoming smile and a kind of tired brightness that made people instinctively soften when they approached her line. Her chestnut hair was tied back in a loose braid that had started to fall apart after hours of work, and her pale cheeks were flushed from the warmth inside the store. She was slender, with expressive green eyes that seemed to read people before they spoke. Though she usually appeared cheerful, the way her fingers drummed lightly on the counter revealed a quiet restlessness, someone used to juggling more responsibility than her age should have required. "Evening, Mr. Hartwell," she said gently as Jonas approached. "Looks rough. Out there. They say the blizzard's picking up faster than expected." Jonas set his items down. "It's coming in sooner than the forecast said." His voice was low and steady, the kind that stayed calm regardless of what the outside world was doing. He didn't elaborate. He rarely did. "You headed home before it gets too bad?" Sarah asked, scanning the groceries. She wasn't prying, just showing the cautious kindness she gave everyone. "That's the plan," Jonas replied. She bagged his items and pushed the package toward him. "Be safe out there." He offered a small nod of thanks and stepped back through the automatic doors. The cold greeted him immediately, cutting through the brief warmth he'd carried out from the store. The wind had grown stronger, pushing sheets of loose snow across the parking lot, scraping the asphalt like shifting sand. Jonas tightened his jacket and walked toward his old pickup truck, an aging Ford with chipped paint and a stubborn engine that still somehow started every winter. He slipped the grocery bag onto the passenger seat, pulled the door halfway shut, then stopped. A sensation, quiet, sharp, unmistakable, ran across the back of his neck. Old instincts, the kind that never really faded after deployment, tightened his posture. Something in the parking lot didn't fit. Not danger exactly, but something wrong. Jonas turned. Most of the cars were gone. Only a few remained, their taillights fading into the white haze as drivers hurried home. But in the far corner, almost hidden behind a recycling bin, sat a minivan. Snow piled high against its sides, stacked unevenly like wind-blown sand dunes. The vehicle's windows were opaque with frost, and its tires were nearly buried. Jonas frowned. That van had been there a while, long enough that no fresh tracks led to or from it. The snowfall around the doors was untouched. The tailpipe was packed with ice. No engine had run in hours. He waited a moment, listening. Nothing. No sound, no movement. His breath formed a cloud in the air as he walked toward the van. The wind clawed at his coat, but he pushed through it, each step deliberate. When he reached the driver's side window, he wiped away a thick coat of frost with his glove. At first, he saw only darkness. The interior was cluttered with discarded wrappers, a fast food cup tipped on its side, and a blanket tangled near the floor. It looked like someone had been living out of it or passing through with little regard for order. Then something shifted. Jonas leaned closer, steadying his breath. 3 small shapes lay pressed tightly together in the back seat. They were German Shepherd puppies, no more than 3 months old, huddled so closely it was hard to tell where one ended and the next began. Their bodies were stiff with cold. Frost had formed along their fur. The largest pup was deep black with faint copper markings around the eyes and legs. Another pup, tan with a thin white streak between its brows, had its head tucked beneath the black one's neck. The smallest, a pale gray pup with a narrow build, lay almost motionless under the warmth the others tried to give. None moved. None made a sound. Puppies should have been restless, curious, noisy. These were silent. Jonas felt something in his chest tighten, a feeling too familiar to mistake. Silence like that wasn't peace. It was the edge of life slipping. He tried the door handle, frozen fast. He tried another, locked, sealed by ice. The wind picked up again, blowing snow across his boots, but Jonas barely noticed. His focus remained fixed on the 3 small forms inside the van. Nothing in their posture suggested play or sleep. This was stillness born of cold, exhaustion, and a long wait without help. Someone had left them here. Someone had walked away. Jonas stepped back, breath fogging the air, and stared into the frost-covered window. He didn't decide in a dramatic moment. No burst of heroism. No cinematic instant. It was simply instinct. Steady, unquestioned. The same instinct that once made him step between falling debris and a fellow soldier without thinking. A learned reflex of protecting what could not protect itself. "Not tonight," he murmured, voice carried off by the wind. He didn't yet know that saving them would change everything for him. He didn't know they would one day stand where his fears tried to swallow him whole. He didn't know their warmth would one day break the ice in his own heart. All he knew was that the storm was rising, and 3 small lives inside that van did not have much time. Jonas stood still for several seconds, letting the wind push hard against his back while he considered his next move. The minivan's windows had frosted into opaque sheets, swallowing the outlines of the 3 puppies he had barely managed to glimpse a moment ago. Snow drifted along the seams of the doors, gathering in uneven mounds that clung to the metal like stubborn barnacles. The wind howled across the empty parking lot, carrying with it the sharp sting of airborne ice that scratched at Jonas's cheeks. He exhaled slowly, his breath curling into the air like exhaust from a struggling engine. He circled the vehicle again, checking each door with gloved hands. All frozen. The tailpipe thick with snow. The tires half buried. Whoever had left this van here had either disappeared into the storm hours ago or had no intention of returning. Jonas pressed his palm against the glass once more, clearing a smear of frost to confirm what his instincts were already shouting at him. The puppies had not moved. He glanced toward the grocery store. The lights still glowed behind the automatic doors, and through the haze of snow he could faintly see silhouettes of customers finishing last-minute errands. None of them noticed him. None of them saw the minivan. None of them felt the urgency building in Jonas's chest. He ran a hand through his short, stiff hair and headed back toward his truck with his steps tight and resolute. He reached the open driver's side door, leaned in, and pulled a long metal tool from behind his seat. a worn steel pry bar, scratched and chipped from years of repairs. He carried it not as a weapon, but as a problem-solving tool, something that had helped him force open warped doors, pry loose heavy branches, or fix machinery in conditions far worse than this. Tonight, however, it felt heavier than usual, as if unaware of the stakes it was about to carry. Jonas turned and trudged back to the van, gripping the bar firmly. The wind whipped the hem of his coat, and snow gathered like small dunes at his boots. He approached the passenger side window, assessing the weakest point in the glass. The top corner, always the most brittle, had already formed a web of ice fractures. He lifted the pry bar, angling it carefully. His movements were measured, precise, the product of training that had once demanded absolute steadiness under pressure. Just as he prepared to strike, headlights washed over him in a bright sweep. A pickup truck rolled slowly into the lot, the beams cutting through the storm. Jonas lowered the pry bar slightly and stepped back from the van, his eyes narrowing as the truck pulled into the space 2 rows over. The engine idled loudly before shutting off. A moment later, the driver's door opened and a man stepped out, a large figure bundled in a heavy brown canvas coat. The man was Harlan Briggs, the night shift snowplow operator for this part of Boise. Harlan was in his early 60s, tall and thick-set, with the broad build of someone who had spent decades shoveling driveways, hauling lumber, and clearing roads. His beard was a dense storm-gray mass that covered most of his lower face, and his dark eyes were small but sharp beneath bushy brows. Despite his intimidating bulk, Harlan's personality leaned toward the soft-spoken and patient. He carried a calm steadiness that made people trust him without effort. His job required it. Winter storms were his battlefield, but he never treated them with bravado, only disciplined caution. "Hartwell," Harlan called out, his voice muffled under his scarf as he moved through the snow. "Didn't expect to see you out here this late." Jonas lowered the pry bar further, though he didn't hide it. "Storm came early," he replied. "Thought I'd get supplies before the roads shut down." Harlan nodded, glancing around the lot before his gaze settled on the minivan. "Anyone still in that thing?" "Not people. 3 puppies," Jonas answered. "They're freezing in there." Harlan's expression softened into concern. "Puppies? Hell, poor things must have been stuck for hours." He stepped closer to the van, brushing frost from the window with his thick glove. "You call animal control?" "Storm's overloaded the lines," Jonas said. "Won't get help in time." Harlan clicked his tongue, a habit that surfaced when he was troubled. "Well, don't let me stop you. Need a hand?" Jonas shook his head once. "I can manage." He didn't say the rest. That instinctively, this felt like something he had to do himself, as if the responsibility had chosen him rather than the other way around. Harlan hesitated, but after a moment he stepped back. "All right. If you need anything, I'm here," he said, before turning toward the store. His boots thudded heavily through the snow as he pushed through the doors, disappearing into the fluorescent light. Jonas returned his attention to the minivan. The storm's howl was louder now, and flakes whipped sideways in chaotic streaks. He planted his feet, tightened his grip on the metal beer, and raised it again. The puppies inside remained still, too still, and that urgency burned sharper in his chest. He struck the corner of the window. A sharp crack echoed across the lot, swallowed quickly by the wind. The first blow created a small fracture. The second widened it. By the third strike, the glass splintered into a spiderweb pattern that trembled beneath the force. Jonas pressed his gloved hand against the weakened spot, pushing until the frozen panel gave way with a brittle crunch. Shards clattered inward, landing on the front seat like scattered ice chips. Cold air rushed out of the vehicle, carrying with it the stale smell of damp upholstery and something faintly sour: neglect, abandonment, time. Jonas reached through the broken frame, brushing aside any loose fragments clinging to the edges. His hand moved directly to the manual lock. It was stiff, frozen into place, but after a firm tug, it snapped upward. He stepped around to the rear door and pulled. At first, it resisted. Ice clung to the rubber seal, stretching like glue. Jonas planted a shoulder against the frame, braced his feet, and yanked with all his strength. The seal cracked, then tore apart, and the door jerked open with a sound like fabric ripping. Cold wind surged into the van's interior, scattering bits of frost across the seats. Jonas leaned in, the breath catching in his throat. The 3 puppies lay bundled exactly as before. Up close, their size startled him. They were so small, no bigger than loaves of bread beneath the thin layer of fur. He reached in and placed his hand gently on the black pup. The fur was stiff, the skin beneath frighteningly cold, but there was warmth, barely. A tremor, a breath so faint he could feel it more than see it. "Hang in there," he murmured softly. The tan puppy shifted weakly, a tiny whine escaping its throat. The gray one did not move at all. Jonas moved quickly now, but with care. He reached deeper into the van, sliding his arms beneath all three pups so he wouldn't separate them. They were astonishingly light, too light, and they sagged limply in his grip. Snow blew across the open doorway as he backed out, cradling them tightly against his chest. He shielded them with the front of his coat, pressing them close to his body to share what warmth he had. The wind roared around him much louder now, but Jonas heard none of it. All he could hear was the fragile breathing against his jacket, the faint signs of life pressed into his arms. He turned toward his truck, tightening his hold. The storm was only getting worse, and he needed to move fast. Jonas crossed the parking lot with the puppies gathered tightly against his chest, their small bodies hidden beneath the folds of his coat, as if he were carrying the embers of a dying fire. He refused to let go out. The storm had intensified in the minutes he spent breaking the van open. Snow blew across the asphalt in sharp horizontal streaks, swirling around his legs and stinging his face so harshly that his eyes watered. His boots skidded once on a patch of ice, but he tightened his grip instinctively to keep the animals secure. His breath grew heavy in the cold, each exhale forming a thick cloud that immediately vanished into the wind. The black puppy, a sturdier one with a budding strength, visible even through weakness, shifted faintly under his arm, letting out a tiny tremor. That slight movement encouraged Jonas, though the warmth in its body was barely noticeable. The tan puppy remained limp but breathed shallowly. The smallest pale gray pup lay still as a stone, weightless in a way that frightened him more than the storm. By the time Jonas reached his truck, the side mirror was coated in ice, and the windshield had begun to crust over with white frost. He pulled the driver's door open, placed the puppies on the passenger seat with care, and climbed inside. The interior offered no true warmth, but it was shelter. The wind's roar dulled, replaced by the softer sound of his ragged breathing and the soft tick of the frozen metal settling. He turned the key in the ignition. The engine coughed once, twice, then sputtered to life with a low growl, sending a shudder through the entire vehicle. Jonas immediately cranked the heat dial to its highest setting, though he knew it would take time before the vents did more than blow cold air. Time the puppies didn't have. Snow whipped violently across the windshield, blurring his view of the road and reducing the world to an abstract haze of white. He reached over to unwrap his coat from around the puppies, creating a small nest of fabric on the seat. The black puppy's chest rose and fell, weak but steady enough that Jonas allowed himself a breath of relief. The tan puppy showed less movement, but its nose twitched, signaling life, but the smallest did not move. Jonas placed his fingertips gently on its chest. Nothing. He leaned in closer. Still nothing. Panic prickled the edges of his thoughts, but he refused to give it space. His hands, though large and calloused, moved with practiced precision, skills born from years of repairing delicate components in aircraft under pressure. "Come on," he whispered, his voice barely above a breath. "Stay with me." He pulled the tiny pup toward him and placed it in his lap. Its fur felt stiff, like frost-covered grass, and its limbs gave no resistance. Jonas tilted its head back gently and placed 2 fingers on the narrowest part of its rib cage, searching for the subtle rise that signaled breath. None came. Instinct took over. He angled the pup's body on his thigh and began tiny compressions. Careful, controlled, no more than the pressure needed to press through the thickness of its fur. The rhythm was quiet but determined, matching the internal cadence he'd kept for years in emergencies. Steady, purposeful, unbroken. 1, 2, 3, he murmured, counting softly. After every set, he lowered his face to the pup's muzzle and gave a small breath, just enough to lift its chest without overwhelming fragile lungs. The engine rumbled beneath the effort, and little by little, the vents began to exhale lukewarm air. Jonas didn't look up. Snow battered the truck outside, but the world inside had shrunk to a single, unmoving puppy, cradled in his hands. A knock startled him. He turned sharply to see Harlan Briggs standing outside the passenger side window, face half hidden beneath his hood, frost clinging to his beard. Harlan shielded his eyes against the wind and peered inside with concern. Jonas rolled the window down only an inch. Enough for sound, but not enough for the storm to invade. "You good?" Harlan asked, raising his voice against the wind. "Trying to be," Jonas replied, continuing compressions without pausing. "One of them's not breathing." Harlan's worried gaze flicked to the bundle in Jonas's lap. "Damn, I'll keep an eye out here until you're ready to move. Roads are bad. Take it slow." Jonas nodded once. Harlan gave a final thumbs up, then trudged back toward the store, his silhouette swallowed quickly by drifting snow. Jonas refocused on the task. His fingers pressed again, and again. His thoughts narrowed to a point. No room for fear, no room for doubt. He had been here before, but with people instead of animals. He remembered the desert heat, the shaking ground, the urgency of saving someone while time clawed at him ruthlessly. But here, the stakes felt strangely heavier. These small creatures had no one else in the world, no voice, no protection, no second chance unless he created one for them right now. At the fourth cycle of compressions, a faint tremor brushed against his fingertip. He froze. Then it came again, a tiny twitch under his hand, followed by a soft gasp that sounded like air being drawn through a thin reed. "That's it," Jonas breathed, feeling a surge of relief so sharp it nearly shook him. "Come on, keep going." He rubbed the pup's chest gently, warming it with the friction of his palm. Another small inhale came, followed by a slow exhale that confirmed the breath wasn't accidental. Jonas pulled the pup closer, cupping it in both hands. "You're not done yet," he whispered. The heat inside the vehicle finally began creeping upward. The black puppy lifted its head weakly and let out a faint whine, nudging its tan companion as if urging it to wake. The tan pup stirred, blinking slowly, but remained curled in a tight ball. Jonas checked the smallest again. Its breathing was shallow, but present. The relief he felt softened his entire posture, though the tension in his shoulders remained. He couldn't relax yet. He looked at the dashboard clock. If he didn't leave soon, the roads back to his cabin would disappear under the storm. He secured the pups gently on the passenger seat again, adjusting his coat into a cradle that would hold warmth. The smallest he placed closest to the center vent, where warm air now flowed. The black pup curled protectively around the other two, as if continuing the role it had played in the van. Jonas shifted the truck into reverse. The tires spun briefly before gripping the icy pavement. He turned the wheel and eased the truck toward the lot exit, headlights carving narrow tunnels through the white chaos ahead. As he merged onto the road, the storm swallowed the city behind him. The windshield wipers dragged across glass thick with snow, barely keeping the view clear. His knuckles whitened around the steering wheel, and every muscle stayed alert. Beside him, 3 fragile breaths rose and fell, uneven, faint, but alive. Jonas drove deeper into the storm, leaving the parking lot behind, knowing that the smallest pup had nearly slipped away in his hands. And the night was far from over. Jonas followed the narrow road that snaked through the foothills, the truck pushing against the storm as though forcing its way through a wall of white cloth. Snow piled quickly along the edges of the route, forming uneven ridges that brushed against the sides of the tires. Each gust of wind jolted the vehicle, and every few moments Jonas had to lean forward to squint through the windshield, correcting the truck's direction by instinct more than sight. The wipers dragged across the glass in slow, heavy arcs, barely managing to clear the accumulating frost. The puppies remained bundled on the passenger seat, huddled together under Jonas's thick coat. The black pup had its head propped against the tan one's neck, its breathing still shaky but steady. The tan pup lay curled tightly, limbs tucked beneath its body, as if protecting its diminishing warmth. The smallest of the 3 rested closest to the vent, rising and falling in unsteady intervals. Jonas checked them whenever the road straightened enough to take a hand from the wheel for a second, never longer. Outside, the towering pines lining the road bent and shivered in the wind. Their branches were heavy with snow, drooping like old flags on forgotten poles. Every so often one would sway and release a thick clump of snow that thudded heavily onto the ground or onto the roof of the truck, causing Jonas to flinch ever so slightly. The storm had fully matured into a whiteout, the kind of winter assault that silenced even the wild animals that usually roamed these woods. When Jonas's cabin finally came into view, it appeared like a dark shape carved into the landscape, a sturdy single-story structure made of weather-worn timber. Snow had piled knee-deep along the steps, and the roof carried a thick layer that sagged slightly in the center. The porch light remained on, flickering in protest against the gusts that battered it. Jonas pulled the truck into the small clearing beside the cabin and let the engine idle for a moment before shutting it off. Darkness settled in the cab instantly, save for the faint glow of the dashboard. He opened the door, bracing himself as the wind tried to yank it from his hand. Snow rushed inside, swirling around the interior before dissipating into the cold air. Jonas gathered the puppies again, lifting them gently but firmly, ensuring none of them were exposed to the open air longer than necessary. The smallest whimpered, just a short, airy sound, but Jonas took it as a good sign. Crossing the yard was slow. The storm had thickened the snow into soft drifts that swallowed Jonas's boots with each step. He leaned forward to shield the puppies from the icy wind, holding them tight against his chest. By the time he reached the porch, the coat he used to shield them was coated in frost. He stomped the snow off his boots, turned the latch, and pushed the cabin door open. Warm air greeted him. Not comfortable warmth, but a mild, lingering heat from the stove he had kept running earlier in the afternoon. The cabin smelled faintly of cedar and old coffee. Jonas stepped inside, closed the door behind him, and felt the storm's roar shift into a distant, muffled rumble. His living space was small but orderly. A wide stone fireplace dominated one wall, its iron stove still holding the last of the embers. A wooden table sat in the center, one chair pulled out, a mug beside it. A shelf of tools and emergency supplies lined the corner near the door. Jonas set the puppies on a thick wool blanket he spread in front of the stove. He knelt beside them, checking each one carefully. The black pup's breathing had grown deeper, though still labored. The tan pup blinked slowly but responded to Jonas's touch by shifting closer to the warmth. The smallest, however, now felt unusually hot beneath his hand. Jonas frowned. He recognized the sign immediately. Rebound fever. Rapid, dangerous overheating that struck when a body too cold began trying too quickly to right itself. Jonas stood and grabbed a metal poker from the rack beside the stove, stirring the embers until they glowed brighter. He added fresh logs, dry, split pine pieces stacked neatly by the wall, and the fire caught quickly, sending orange light flickering across the room. The temperature rose with each passing moment, pushing back the creeping cold that clung to the puppy's fur. Satisfied the stove was stable, Jonas moved to the small kitchen area and filled a kettle with water. He set it over the firebox to warm. Then he retrieved a bottle of glucose syrup he kept in his emergency kit, something he had learned to store after years of living in an isolated cabin where help was never close. He stirred a few spoonfuls into a bowl of warm water until the mixture thinned into something the puppies could swallow. As the water heated, Jonas checked the smallest pup again. Its breathing had grown rapid and shallow. Heat radiated from its chest. Its tiny limbs twitched occasionally, a sign of distress, not strength. Jonas lifted the pup gently and unbuttoned his shirt halfway, placing the creature against his bare chest, letting his own body act as a regulator. The pup's warmth pressed fiercely against him, while Jonas's own heat wrapped around it like a steady pulse. The stovetop kettle began to whistle softly. Jonas reached for the bowl he had prepared earlier and brought it closer, dipping a clean cloth into the warm solution. He touched the pups' mouths one by one, allowing small drops to pass through their lips. The black pup accepted the liquid slowly, the tan one lapped weakly, and the smallest needed Jonas's hand to guide the fluid along its tongue. A sudden knock rang through the cabin. Jonas stiffened immediately. Visitors were rare, especially in a storm like this. He lowered the smallest pup back onto the blanket but kept a hand on it as he listened for another knock. It came again, 3 sharp raps. Jonas rose carefully and walked to the door, checking through the small window first. A figure stood on the porch, snow-covered and hunched. Jonas pulled the door open a few inches. Standing outside was Waylon Price, a neighbor from half a mile down the road. Waylon was in his early 40s, short and slightly stocky, with sandy beard stubble that never quite grew into a full beard. His cheeks were red from the cold, his eyes bright blue and always flicking with alertness. Waylon was known locally for his friendliness and a tendency to talk too much when nervous, but he had a dependable core, someone who noticed things others didn't. "Storm's getting ugly," Waylon said, brushing snow from his coat sleeves. "Saw your truck lights from the ridge and wanted to check on you." "I'm fine," Jonas replied, keeping the door half closed. "Got my hands full at the moment." Waylon leaned to the side and peered into the cabin. "That puppies?" Jonas nodded. "Found them abandoned. They're in bad shape." Waylon's expression dropped into something softer and more serious. "You need anything? I've got extra blankets, generator fuel, whatever." Jonas shook his head. "Got what I need, but thanks." Waylon hesitated briefly, studying Jonas in a way that suggested concern more than curiosity. "All right. You know where I am if you need help." I'll be plowing the ridge road in the morning if the storm settles. Jonas nodded once. Stay safe. You too, Wayland said before retreating into the snowstorm, disappearing behind a curtain of white. Jonas shut the door firmly and returned to the puppies. The cabin felt warmer now, the fire throwing soft light across the wooden floor. He settled onto the blanket again, lifting the smallest pup into his hands. Its breathing remained quick, its body hot. He cupped it to his chest once more, steadying its fragile pulse with his own. The storm raged outside, but inside the cabin, Jonas had created a small barrier of warmth and focus. He rocked gently, trying to help the fever ebb without shocking the pup's fragile body. The quiet tightening in his jaw said what he didn't voice aloud. He wasn't losing this one, not tonight. The fire in Jonas's stove had settled into a steady crackle, each snap of resin in the pine logs releasing a faint scent of woodland sap that softened the harshness of the winter storm still raging outside. The cabin glowed in warm tones of amber and deep orange, shadows dancing lazily along the wooden beams overhead. Snow pounded the roof in irregular bursts, like fists of wind trying to break in, but the thick timbers held steady. Jonas sat on the floor near the stove, his back against the edge of his armchair, cradling the smallest puppy against his bare chest. The fevered heat radiating from the tiny body seeped into his skin, and with every breath the pup fought for, Jonas matched it with steady calm. The larger black puppy had curled itself along Jonas's thigh, its dark eyes half open, watching him with an instinctive protectiveness. The tan puppy lay tucked into the wool blanket beside the stove, breathing slowly, the flickering light making its soft fur glow like faint copper. As the fever began to stabilize, Jonas eased the smallest pup away from his chest and wrapped it gently in a flannel cloth, warmed on the stovetop's edge. He placed the pup between the other two, letting their shared body heat create a stable cocoon. Jonas finally leaned back, rubbing tiredness from his eyes. His muscles ached from the cold, the manual CPR, and the tension of maintaining constant focus. He hadn't noticed how hard his heart had been working until now, when the relative quiet of the cabin brought every beat into sharp clarity. Outside, the wind changed direction. Jonas heard it shift, a long, low groan sweeping through the valley like something ancient waking up. The temperature dropped again, enough for a thin line of frost to creep along the bottom edges of the window pane. Jonas stood, adjusted the stove door to slow the burn, and checked that the kettle still held enough warm water for the next round of feedings. He moved through the cabin quietly, steps careful, shoulders tight, as if he feared disturbing more than just the puppies. The storm was violent but familiar. Jonas had lived through enough winters in the mountains to know how to read the moods of the wind. What he hadn't learned was how to quiet the storms that lived inside him. A deep thud landed on the cabin roof. Jonas froze. Another thud followed, heavier this time, snow sliding off the metal sheeting, something he'd heard many times before, something entirely harmless. But his mind didn't recognize it as harmless. The sound didn't transform into the image of snow shifting. It turned into something else, something older, a mortar drop, a memory detonating. Jonas's breath caught in his throat. His vision narrowed as the cozy amber glow of his cabin collapsed inward, replaced by a blinding flash of desert light that his brain dragged up from a place he wished he had buried forever. He staggered backward. The puppies stirred, confused by the sudden tension in the room. The third thud hit the roof, and the cabin disappeared. Jonas heard a roar. Imagined or remembered, he couldn't tell. Smoke filled the edges of his vision. His ears rang sharply, drowning out the stove, the wind, the crackling fire. His knees buckled and he dropped beside the kitchen table, gripping the wooden leg with both hands. His breath came in sharp, chopped bursts. He forced himself to swallow, but couldn't get a full breath in. His pulse hammered in his temples, his throat tightening until it felt like he was inhaling through a pinhole. Incoming! Incoming! Get down! Voices from years ago rushed back, distorted and overlapping, shouting commands that tangled with panic. He crawled under the table, curling his body inward, bracing for a blast that wasn't real. The room spun. Tears he didn't feel forming slipped from the corners of his eyes, dropping silently onto the wooden floor. His whole body shook. His fists clenched so hard his knuckles turned pale. The cabin didn't exist. The puppies didn't exist. For a moment, Jonas wasn't a man in Idaho on a winter night. He was a soldier again, surrounded by dust, heat, and fear so strong it felt like a physical weight on his chest. Then something warm touched his hand. At first he flinched, recoiling fast, eyes wide and unfocused. But the warmth returned, a small nose nudging against his knuckles, followed by a soft whine that felt like it pierced straight through the noise in his mind. The black puppy, strongest of the three, had managed to wriggle off the blanket and crawl under the table. Its fur brushed against Jonas's wrist. It pressed its body firmly against his leg, anchoring him to something solid, something real. Its breaths came slow and steady, warm against his skin. Jonas blinked. The desert haze flickered. Another sound reached him, a soft, shaky attempt at a bark. The tan puppy had dragged itself closer to the table's edge. Its small body trembled with effort, but its gaze fought to find Jonas underneath the shadow of the table. Its ears flattened, as if pleading silently. Then a third presence arrived, lighter, weaker, but determined. The smallest puppy, still feverish, half stumbled across the floor, nose pressed low, following the scent of Jonas's fear. It reached the table leg and pushed its tiny face against Jonas's knee, whimpering softly. 3 little lives pressed against him. 3 breaths, 3 heartbeats, 3 warm bodies. Here, now. The ringing in his ears eased. The roaring wind returned to its place outside. The dusty desert mirage drained away, revealing the log walls of his cabin and the flicker of firelight. Jonas exhaled in a single broken release. He lowered one hand, the motion shaky, and touched the black puppy's head. Its fur was soft, despite the earlier cold, and the pup leaned into the contact with surprising certainty. The tan pup edged forward, placing its paw on Jonas's boot. The smallest one licked the back of his hand, its tongue warm and trembling. Jonas closed his eyes and let the contact pull him fully back into the present. The panic didn't vanish, but it loosened. The air became breathable again. The world lost its sharp edges. His hands steadied gradually. He wiped his eyes with his sleeve, though moisture still clung there. You're okay," he whispered, but his voice was aimed more at himself than the pup's. The smallest pup responded with a soft chirp, leaning into his palm. Jonas scooped the puppy gently, cradling its fragile body against his chest again. The fever warmth no longer frightened him. It grounded him. He crawled out from under the table slowly, careful not to disturb the pups. The tan puppy followed him across the floor, wobbling but determined. The black puppy trotted close behind, the guardian of the group. Jonas sat down near the stove, legs stretched out, back leaning against the sofa. The puppies gathered on his lap and chest, clinging to him with pure instinct. For several long moments, Jonas simply sat there, breathing with them, letting the cabin's quiet settle around him like a blanket. Snow crashed off the roof again, but this time it registered simply as snow. He tightened his hold around the puppies. "I've got you," he murmured, "and you've got me." The cabin stayed warm. The storm raged outside, but inside the battle had shifted. Jonas had not fought it alone. By the time the storm eased into a tired whisper, the fire in Jonas's stove had burned low again, reduced to a soft red glow beneath layers of charred wood. Jonas sat with his back to the sofa, legs stretched out, 3 puppies sleeping across his lap and chest. The smallest was tucked beneath his chin, its breathing fast but more controlled, a faint rise and fall against the warmth of Jonas's shirt. The black puppy lay sprawled across Jonas's thigh, its heavier weight a reassuring anchor. The tan one curled at his ribs like a warm patch of sand. Outside, the wind moved gently now, no longer howling but muttering, as if speaking only to the trees. The storm wasn't done, not in Idaho, not in this season, but it had retreated for the moment, giving Jonas the silence he needed to think. The flashback had left his muscles tense and his mind restless. He wasn't proud of the way he had folded under the table, but the puppies pressing against him afterward had grounded him in a way he couldn't fully explain. He wasn't used to being comforted, and yet they had done it without hesitation. He rubbed his thumb along the smallest puppy's back. Its fur felt warmer than before, but its body trembled slightly, a sign the fever hadn't fully settled. His jaw tightened. They needed help, real medical help, not just what he could manage in a cabin with blankets and a stove. When a weak ray of light finally pierced through the frosted window, Jonas made his decision. "We're going," he murmured softly, his voice rough from a long night. "We're not losing this fight." He lifted each puppy gently, wrapping them in blankets warm by the stove. The smallest he slid inside his coat, against his chest again, not for emergency regulation this time, but because the pup clung to him with a soft, instinctive need. Jonas could feel it, fragile but determined. He opened the door and braced himself as cold air swept in. Snow had piled against the porch rails and buried most of the footprints from the night before. The sky above was a pale gray sheet, flattened and dim, but clear compared to the chaos of the previous night. Jonas trudged to the truck, started the engine, and let the heater run for a few minutes before placing the puppies gently on the passenger seat. The black pup lifted its head slowly, blinking at the sudden light. The tan one tucked its nose under Jonas's sleeve as he adjusted the coat around them. The smallest didn't move much, but its breathing was steady enough to reassure him. The drive into town was slow. Snowbanks along the road had thickened into ridges that forced Jonas to navigate carefully. The plows had carved a single lane through the route, their tracks deep but uneven. Jonas recognized the pattern. It was Harlan Briggs's work. The man could cut through a blizzard like he was part of the landscape itself. Halfway to town, Jonas spotted Harlan at the edge of a ridge. The older man was standing beside his orange plow truck, examining a fallen pine branch. Even from a distance, Jonas could see Harlan's massive frame bundled beneath layers of flannel and insulated canvas. His beard was coated in frost again, and his gloved hands were gripping the edge of the branch as though deciding whether to drag it or break it. As Jonas slowed the truck, Harlan looked up and lifted an arm in greeting. Jonas rolled his window down an inch. "Kids holding on?" Harlan called out, voice carrying across the frozen air. "Barely," Jonas answered. "Heading to the clinic." Harlan nodded, stepping closer. "Good call. Avery's tough, but she's sharp. She'll know what to do." Jonas's brows raised slightly. "Avery?" "New vet," Harlan said. "Started earlier this year. Young, but she knows her stuff. Grew up in Montana ranch country. Half the time she fixes things with grit alone." Jonas nodded once. He didn't linger. The smallest pup needed more than grit. When he reached town, the roads were clearer. Snow still clung to signs and rooftops, but plows had done enough that Jonas could maneuver without risking the ditch. The vet clinic stood at the end of a row of small businesses, a modest building with pale green siding and a large window fogged from the temperature difference inside. Jonas parked close to the entrance. The warmth from the heater had softened the frost on the passenger side window, revealing the sight of the black pup sniffing weakly at the coolant-scented air. The tan pup shifted and pressed its nose against the glass. The smallest still lay wrapped in Jonas's coat, its body limp but breathing. Jonas stepped inside the clinic, holding the puppies to his chest. The waiting area was small but bright, decorated with posters of smiling dogs and diagrams of animal anatomy. A counter stood at the back, behind which a woman in her early 30s organized files into a cabinet. This was Soren Patel, the clinic's receptionist and technician. Soren was average height, slender with a runner's frame, and wore her black hair tied into a neat bun. Her face held a calm intelligence. Her features were sharp but welcoming, and she had a habit of raising one eyebrow slightly when worried. Her scrubs were patterned with small cartoon cats, but the professionalism in her posture undercut any hint of whimsy. She looked up and froze mid-motion when she saw the pups. "Oh, those look bad," she said, voice soft but urgent. She hurried around the counter. "Come with me. Dr. Reese is in the treatment room." She led him through a swinging door into a large room filled with stainless steel tables, cabinets of supplies, and a faint antiseptic scent. At the far end, adjusting an overhead surgical lamp, stood Dr. Avery Reese. Avery was in her late 20s, tall and long-limbed, with sandy brown hair pulled into a tight ponytail that still let a few stray strands fall along her temples. She had sharp cheekbones, a narrow jawline, and expressive hazel eyes that seemed to catch every detail instantly. There was a steadiness to her movement, a quiet confidence of someone who had grown up fixing injured livestock before ever touching a clinical tool. Her voice, when she turned to greet Jonas, carried the tone of someone accustomed to both leading and listening. "What do we have?" Avery asked, stepping closer. Jonas laid the puppies carefully on the metal table. Avery leaned in immediately. Her hands were swift but gentle, her eyes narrowing with concentration. "Hypothermia? Severe?" she murmured. "The smallest has rebound fever. They're all dehydrated. This one," she lifted the smallest pup carefully, "is still in a dangerous range." Jonas's throat tightened. "Can you save them?" Avery didn't answer immediately. She pressed her stethoscope gently against the tiny chest, listened, then checked the gums, then the paws. Finally, she looked up. "I won't lie," she said, tone firm but not cold. "Two of them I'm confident about. The smallest," she exhaled slowly. "It's still a coin toss, but they're here now, and that gives them a chance. Jonas nodded once. It was all he needed to hear. Avery turned to Soren. Get warmed fluids ready and prep the incubator. Then she looked back at Jonas. You did good bringing them in, she said. Now, let's see what we can fight for. And Jonas watched, heart tight but steady, as Avery began working. The hum of medical equipment filled the treatment room with a soft, steady vibration, a sound that felt strangely out of place in the quiet Idaho morning. Outside the clinic's frosted windows, the sky had lightened into a pale silver, and a thin veil of snow drifted lazily from the roof edges. Inside, however, time thinned into something tight and fragile as Jonas stood beside the stainless steel table where the puppies lay. Dr. Avery Reese moved with sharp focus, her ponytail brushing the collar of her coat as she prepared warmed fluids and syringes. She had changed into a dark green medical smock since Jonas arrived. Sleeves rolled to her elbows, revealing toned forearms, arms shaped by years of lifting hay bales and working with livestock long before she earned her degree. She had a knack for maintaining a calm expression, even while her eyes worked like quick, analytical tools. Soren Patel, the technician, worked beside her, adjusting IV lines with careful precision. Her movements were smooth, practiced, and quiet. Soren was the type who kept her thoughts tucked neatly in her back pocket, showing them only through action. She didn't speak unless necessary, but when she did, her words were clear, steady, almost grounding. The black puppy had taken to the warmed blanket quickly, curling into a small crescent shape. Avery attached a tiny IV catheter to its foreleg, and the pup let out a soft squeak but didn't resist. The tan puppy whimpered occasionally but kept one eye open, watching Jonas as though anchoring itself to the one presence it trusted most. The smallest, wrapped in soft cotton and connected to a slim oxygen tube, rested inside the incubator, its body nearly lost among the folds of cloth. The incubator emitted a continuous, faint whir, maintaining a controlled temperature that fluctuated gently to mimic natural warmth. Even with all of that support, the pup's chest lifted and fell in rapid, uneven motions, like a heartbeat trapped in panic. Jonas moved closer, resting a hand on the transparent wall of the incubator. Keep fighting, he whispered. His voice cracked slightly, but he didn't hide it. Avery stepped beside him without interrupting her work. You did the right thing bringing them here early, she said, tone firm enough to counter the tremor in his voice. Hypothermia, that severe can flip into fever fast. You caught it before the crash. Jonas kept his eyes on the smallest pup. Does it have a name? Avery asked. He shook his head slowly. Didn't think that far. Avery nodded. Let's keep it breathing first. Names come after. Another voice entered the room from the side door. Dr. Reese, do you need hands? A man stepped inside. Caleb Moore, the clinic's part-time veterinary assistant. Caleb was in his mid-30s, tall and lean, with wiry muscles that suggested a life spent outdoors. His face was angular, cheekbones sharp, jawline defined beneath a day-old layer of stubble. His brown hair was tousled, and a thin scar ran diagonally from the corner of his left eye to his upper cheek. An old injury Jonas guessed came from ranch work, or a dog that didn't appreciate being handled. Caleb's demeanor held a mix of ruggedness and quiet attentiveness. When he looked at the puppies, something softened around his eyes. Avery glanced toward him. Good, you're here. I need you on fluids. The smallest isn't stabilizing. Caleb nodded, stepping to the counter to gather equipment. On it. Jonas observed him for a moment. Caleb moved with steady confidence, but he wasn't rushed. His hands were large yet precise, the kind of hands that had learned to mend fences and wrap bandages with the same ease. Avery returned to the incubator, adjusting the pup's oxygen. Temperature's still climbing, she said under her breath. We need to slow the spike. Jonas felt the soft burn of worry rise in his chest again. What does that mean? It means the pup's body is trying to come back online too fast, Avery explained. Systems are firing out of sync. If the fever rises too far, organs can start to fail. Soren handed her a syringe filled with a clear liquid. Antipyretic. Safe dosage adjusted for weight. Avery injected it with gentle precision. That should help. Jonas watched the smallest pup's tiny ribs expand and contract under the breathing mask. The sight triggered something tight behind his sternum, a familiar ache, the kind he'd felt standing over soldiers half his age. He shifted his gaze, grounding himself in the present. The black and tan puppies had begun to steady, The black one lifted its head, sniffed the air, then let out a weak but confident woof. The tan pup nudged the blanket with its nose, signaling hunger or discomfort. Jonas reached down and stroked them gently, earning a soft nuzzle from both. "They're fighters," Caleb said quietly, setting fluid bags on the hook above the table. "Most pups this cold don't come back this fast." Jonas nodded stiffly. They did most of the work. They stayed together. Caleb gave a faint smile. Pack instinct. Even at this age, they know not to leave one behind. Jonas swallowed. The words hit him deeper than he expected. Minutes passed. The machines in the room kept up their soft chorus, beeping heart monitors, oxygen hums, fluid drips ticking faintly. Avery moved between the incubator and the table in a fluid rhythm, with Soren and Caleb supporting her every step. Then the heart monitor beeped sharply. The sound cut through the room like a glass blade. Avery turned immediately. "What was that?" Soren's eyes widened, heart rate dropping. Jonas's pulse spiked. "Which one?" Avery didn't answer. She was already beside the incubator. Jonas followed, breath tight. The smallest puppy had stopped breathing. Its tiny chest had frozen in place. The heart rate on the monitor plummeted, numbers flashing in red. Avery's voice sharpened. "We're losing it. Open the incubator, now!" Caleb moved with sudden urgency, unlatching the door. Avery lifted the limp pup with both hands, placing it on the emergency pad beside the table. "Respiratory arrest," she said. "Soren, get the micro mask. Caleb, prep the micro paddles." Jonas stood rooted to the floor. The air around him thickened, the edges of his vision tightening. He recognized the cold sensation sliding down his spine, the same cold that hit before a battlefield casualty report. Avery placed 2 fingers gently on the pup's sternum and began compressions. "Come on, little one," she whispered, her jaw set. Soren fitted the tiny oxygen mask over the muzzle and squeezed the attached bulb slowly. Caleb knelt opposite Avery, ready with the smallest defibrillation paddles Jonas had ever seen. The room drowned in the steady rhythm of Avery's voice. 1, 2, 3, breathe. No movement. Jonas felt the world pull away from under his feet. Avery's tone grew firmer, louder. Again, 1, 2, 3, breathe. Still nothing. Caleb exchanged a glance with her, a silent, sharp question. Avery didn't blink. "Charging micro paddles, low voltage." Caleb nodded and readied the paddles as she lifted her fingers from the pup's chest. "Clear." And Jonas stood there, heart clenched, as they fought to bring breath back to the smallest life he had carried out of the storm. Caleb held the micro paddles steady, his jaw clenched, stubble shadowing the hard angles of his face as he waited for Avery's command. The room was too quiet, so quiet that Jonas could hear the faint click of the defibrillator charging. He gripped the edge of the counter, fingers white with strain. The black and tan puppies whimpered softly nearby, as though sensing the tension in the room and responding with tiny, trembling cries. Avery didn't take her eyes off the smallest pup, lying limp on the emergency pad like a piece of soft ash. "Voltage set," Caleb announced. His voice was low, controlled, but his eyes flickered with unease. Avery gave a single nod. "Clear," she said. Caleb pressed the paddles gently to the pup's chest. The shock was so small it made barely a sound, just a faint snap, like static in a winter sweater. The pup's body jerked a fraction of an inch, hardly a twitch, but enough to make Jonas's heart drop. The monitor beeped once, then fell silent again. "Again," Avery said immediately. Her tone sharpened, becoming clipped, focused, every syllable carrying the pressure of someone used to fighting for small lives. Caleb reset the charge. Soren kept the oxygen bulb steady, squeezing air into the pup's lungs with gentle precision. Jonas leaned closer, breath tight. "Come on," he whispered, voice raw. "Come on, little one. I didn't pull you out of that van for nothing." "Clear," Avery ordered. A second shock. The pup didn't move. The monitor flickered, a faint wavering line, uncertain, stubborn, refusing to decide whether it had reached its end. Avery pressed 2 fingers lightly to the tiny sternum. "Start compressions again," she said to herself more than the others. She began a new cycle, 2 fingers, rhythmic, steady. Small presses against a body no larger than her palm. 1, 2, 3, breathe. Soren squeezed the bulb. Avery repeated. 1, 2, 3, breathe. Jonas couldn't watch anymore, yet he couldn't look away. The memories, the soldiers, the breathless moments on dusty ground, threatened to pull him under. His heart pounded so hard he felt it in his fingertips. but he stayed upright this time. The puppies on the table needed him present, not buried in the past. "Charge again," Avery said. Caleb hesitated. "Avery, we're pushing the limit." Avery's eyes flicked up, hazel, sharp, fiery. "We don't quit." Caleb nodded, jaw tightening, and began another charge. His hands remained steady, even though his pulse beat visibly at his neck. Caleb was the kind of man who hid his emotions beneath a practical mindset, but Jonas could tell he hated this moment as much as any of them. Avery lifted her hands. Clear. The third shock, slightly stronger, clicked through the room. The pup jerked. Then, nothing. The monitor's line was flat. Soren let out a thin breath, her usually calm face cracking at the edges. "Avery? Not yet," Avery snapped. "Heart massage. Keep oxygen going." She cupped her fingers around the pup's tiny ribcage, gently compressing. Her movements stayed perfectly measured. Jonas realized she wasn't just fighting for the pup. She was refusing to accept that something this small and helpless could come so far only to die on a metal table under fluorescent lights. "Come on," Jonas whispered again, this time louder, as if his voice could cross the gap and reach the pup's fading consciousness. "You fought through a storm. Fight this too." Something shifted in the air. A faint tremble ran through the pup's front paw. Avery froze, eyes narrowing. "Hold oxygen," she said. Soren paused mid-squeeze. The pup's paw twitched again. Then its chest rose, so slight that Jonas thought he had imagined it. But then it rose again. A shallow inhale, then another. The monitor beeped. Once, then again. A weak, wavering rhythm. Avery released a long breath, shoulders slumping an inch. "We've got a pulse," she said softly. "Weak, but there." Caleb exhaled and ran a hand through his hair. Soren closed her eyes briefly, centering herself before returning to her duties. Jonas felt his knees nearly give out. He braced a hand on the counter and swallowed the tightness in his throat. His vision blurred for a moment, but he blinked hard and forced everything back into focus. Avery adjusted the oxygen mask, her movements gentler now. "Stay with me," she murmured to the pup, as though coaxing a tiny ember back into flame. They transferred the smallest pup back into the incubator, now with the temperature dialed into a stabilizing mode rather than active warming. Avery monitored the heart rate for several minutes, her sharp hazel eyes watching every flutter of the numbers. The black puppy let out a small bark, a thin, wobbly sound. The tan one pressed its nose to Jonas's hand. He stroked both gently with a thumb that still trembled. "They're responding well," Avery said without looking away from the incubator. "The black one's strong, the tan one's stable. This little one," she inhaled, exhaled slowly. "We're not out of danger, but it's breathing on its own." Jonas nodded. "That's enough for me." Avery finally straightened, rolling her shoulders and brushing loose strands of hair from her face. She moved to the sink, washed her hands, then leaned against the counter with a silent sigh. "You all right?" Caleb murmured, his voice stripped of his usual steady neutrality. Avery let out a faint laugh, tired and raw. "Yeah, just, when they're this small, every second feels like an hour." Caleb nodded. "You kept it alive." Avery's eyes softened. "No, Jonas did. If he hadn't kept them warm, none of them would have made it here." Jonas didn't respond. He kept his gaze on the incubator, on the fragile body rising and falling, with threads of breath. After an hour of monitoring, the smallest pup's heart rate settled into a weak but consistent rhythm. Avery stepped over to Jonas. "I'm keeping them under observation until late afternoon," she said. "But," she studied him closely, "I think they'll do better with you overnight, especially the little one. It seems to calm down when you're close." Jonas lifted his eyes. "You're sure?" Avery nodded. "I'll send you home with supplies. You'll need to feed the smallest every 90 minutes. It'll need skin contact again if the fever spikes or crashes. You'll have to watch for tremors, delayed breathing, and—" "Just tell me everything," Jonas said. Avery smiled, a tired smile, but a genuine one. She turned to prepare a kit of syringes, small bottles of nutrient fluid, antiseptic wipes, gauze, and a portable heating pad no bigger than a paperback book. Soren printed out instructions and highlighted keynotes. Caleb helped secure the incubator's temporary travel setting. When the paperwork was done and the pups had rested long enough, Avery lifted each one gently and placed them into the padded carrier Jonas had brought. The black puppy nuzzled into the corner, already regaining fragments of energy. The tan one rested its muzzle on Jonas's wrist, letting its breath warm his skin. The smallest lay nearest his chest, wrapped securely in layers of soft fabric. Avery knelt beside the carrier. "You keep them warm, keep them together, bring them back tomorrow morning." Jonas nodded. "I will." As he turned toward the door, the smallest pup stirred faintly and pushed its nose into the collar of his coat. Alive. Fighting. Jonas stepped out into the cold morning, carrying the tiny heartbeat that had refused to fade. Sometimes the greatest miracles don't come wrapped in thunder or lightning. They arrive quietly, like 3 shivering puppies in an abandoned van, like an old Marine who thought his best days were behind him, like a night when the storm should have taken life, but instead gave it back. When Jonas carried those fragile bodies out of the blizzard, he thought he was doing the saving. But the truth is, God often sends help in ways we don't expect. Sometimes the miracle we're praying for has 4 paws, a small heartbeat, and eyes that refuse to quit. And sometimes the healing we think we're giving is the healing we desperately needed ourselves. It's easy to forget, in our busy everyday lives, that hope still exists, that kindness still matters, that we're never too old, too broken, or too tired for God to reach down and place something soft and sacred into our hands. Maybe your storm looks different. Maybe it's loneliness. Maybe it's grief. Maybe it's a quiet ache you don't talk about. Whatever it is, listen closely. You are not walking through it alone. The same God who watched over those tiny pups in the freezing dark is watching over you too. And when the night feels heaviest, that's often when His miracles are closest. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who might need a reminder that light still breaks through, even after the longest winter. Leave a comment. Tell us where you were watching from. Or share a moment when God sent you a small miracle. Press like, hit subscribe, and ring the bell so you never miss another story about the beautiful ways God works through animals, through people, and through the quiet places in between. And now, before we close, let us offer a blessing. May God wrap you in His warmth when the world feels cold. May He send loyal companions into your life, human or animal, to walk beside you through every storm. May He lift your spirit, protect your home, and fill your heart with peace tonight. And may you always remember, miracles are real, and one of them might already be on its way to you. If you receive this blessing, write Amen in the comments below. Stay safe, stay hopeful, and may God's grace follow you wherever your road leads.